So if you watched the last movie, I explained that you can really use whatever font that you want to use, because if you have the text type set to static, that font outline will be embedded into the SWF file, the exported Flash file. So why is there then this embed button? Well, this embed button, even though it's enabled right now, really doesn't need to be enabled for a static text object. This embed button really comes into play when you're working with the different text types. For example, if you choose dynamic text, with dynamic text, this text will be populated dynamically, programmatically, most likely. And if that's the case, if it's going to get populated on the fly, in order for the text to be rendered out in the family that you specified here, the end user will need that installed on their system, or you can embed the font outline. You'll also notice when you choose the dynamic option that the show border option becomes available, as does the HTML option. The HTML option can be useful if you have basic HTML formatting applied to the text that will ultimately populate this dynamic text field. So, for example, if the information was coming from a database, and within the database they used bold tags or basic HTML tags like that, then this text field would have the ability to render those HTML tags. Let's say, for example, you're working with an input text field. With an input text field, typically you do want to show the border. What that will do is make the text field look like a text field in an HTML form, and it also gives the end user the ability to type into that text field. So if they're going to be able to type into the text field and you want that text field to display a certain font, they need that font installed on their system. If they don't, it won't be able to render that font. So the solution is to embed the font outline. Just be aware that embedding a font outline can add a little bit of weight to your SWF file. Not a lot, but you just want to be aware of it. You don't want to end up embedding multiple fonts. 1 or 2, maybe 3. Anything more than that is probably too much. If you go ahead and click the embed button, it's going to open up the font embedding dialog box. You can give the font a name. You can specify the family. And then you can specify the character range. If you're working with a Latin-based language like English, you can just come over and select Basic Latin. What that will do is embed all the uppercase and lowercase letters, all the numbers, and most of the punctuation. If you're working with a lot of punctuation, you may opt to select that option as well. And here you can see that we're embedding 114 glyphs. Now, if you're working with different languages, let's say, for example, you're working with a Korean-based language or a Chinese-based language. If that's the case, their characters are so different than a Latin-based language that you may consider creating a completely different project for a couple different reasons. One, the layout will certainly be different, but two, Chinese and Korean-based languages, their characters are so involved when compared to typical letters that the file size for each of these languages, when embedding them, really goes up quite a bit. So it's hard to create a SWF file that supports all of these different languages. It's easy to make an SWF file that supports English and Spanish and Latin-based languages, but once you get into some of these other languages where the characters are completely different, then that's where it becomes problematic in terms of file size and also layout. But nevertheless, that's how you would go about embedding a font into the SWF file. Once you embed it, if it's an input text field or a dynamic text field, the text that ultimately gets populated within that text field will be in the font that you specified.